Hello.
Warum ist
Hopefully
eigentlich so
this
agil?
is
Verstehe jetzt nicht die Frage, also nie gefunden.
hopefully this
Bist du
is
agil?
working.
Erfolgreich?
Oops, a
Was?
deer.
Ethan, warum ist dein Zimmer nie eingestiegen?
Sorry, 1 second. The my Instagram just went a bit crazy. Okay, so here we go. Hopefully this will work on both channels now. And yeah, so it looks like I'm live, which is good. Good to be back. I wanted to come on today to talk about some things that have sort of come up for me recently after I saw a video interview that I did. I thought it was 4 years ago, and somebody corrected me and said, actually, no, it's probably more like 6 years ago, and kind of shocked me really that it was that long ago. But I guess it may have been. I don't know. But anyway, I did this interview, and I've done a number of media interviews over the years, and a very typical thing that I'm asked, and many people are asked when they study or multiple languages or like multiple languages, is how many languages do you speak? Which languages? Can you say something? Typically they'd have kind of either a slogan or they'd have something that they want you to say, and it feels a little bit like being a sort of a circus animal that you're supposed to perform and do this thing and everyone's happy. And I get that it's interesting to do. I understand that there's kind of a fun thing for many people to watch the kind of let's see, let's watch the bear dance, that kind of that weird thing, I guess, with being in the media. And certainly is, whilst understandable, also as somebody who's doing it, it feels a little bit disingenuous to do it, because it's definitely performative, and definitely not very rewarding or fulfilling as the person doing it. I will absolutely push back on anything like that. On this occasion, I didn't. I thought that it was quite nice to sort of hear a little bit of each language, and because it was free flowing and it was kind of supposed to be me just talking and going through languages, it felt less stressful or less less crazy for me to actually just produce the language and talk. And then obviously trusting in the process that there would be a a sort of a final version that would actually end up showing me speaking in these different languages, and that this would be something that people would would sort of watch in the end. And I didn't really know what that would be, and I think I made a short on sort of on YouTube, but also on TikTok about this experience and how, in real terms, I actually spoke Welsh pretty much the whole day and walked around town, and the interview was pretty much in Welsh. And then the very end of it was this question of just speak these languages, and so I did. And I went through, but typically it's not a very natural thing to do, to speak one language after the other. In fact, even the video that I made myself in the very beginning of kind of YouTube polyglots or YouTube language learners, really I did that for the reason of, I feel people do seek the entertainment value, and I've done it a couple of times for that. But at the same time, it's not something that I would typically normally do, and don't particularly like doing. But anyway, I went ahead with it, and basically spoke these different languages. The issue is that when you do it, um, it's very easy to then sort of mix things up. Everything goes into each other, particularly if you speak languages from the same family. So the societal norms of, you know, when you speak a language or which languages are you fluent in, or these kinds of questions are valid questions. They're questions that should, on the face of it, be very, very easy to answer and very simple to give people something that they want in return for that question. Um, the sad reality is that once you study a certain number of languages, actually, it really isn't as simple as that anymore. It becomes quite difficult to pin down languages. And so, what I mean by that is that when you study families of languages or lots and lots of languages over decades, basically you have periods where you'll speak one language better than another. You'll have periods where you know one thing and forget another, or you get rusty. It's all in waves. There are certain times as well where when you speak something or you know something and it takes a bit of practice and you can get it back. Other bits of knowledge or languages you don't in the same way, and that can be down to a few different reasons. So when it comes to languages, what I find is that if languages are similar to ones that you use all the time and you speak them, then yes, you may be able to access them fairly easily, or at least be able to get them back fairly quickly. Other languages, though, you can't. So if a language is very different to other ones that you speak, and you maybe don't feel that you got to a particularly high level, you may be able to communicate in it, then it can be quite tough to recall it. What society does and what the societal norms are when you learn something or do something, we keep adding. We add one, we add another one, we add another one, we add another one, we add another thing. And until we have this kind of pile of in your brain things that we can do or we know, or languages we speak in the case of languages. The reality is actually that this is a constant sort of flow, and knowledge in our brains is 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 quite an interesting thing, because I think our perceptions as individuals of what we can and can't do um, actually also is always in flux. So what we as human beings, I think, struggle with is the idea of things changing. I think that we see this play out in many spheres of what happens in our communities around the world, of how you can't um, you can't keep a wave on the sand. Like there's a very famous song that anyone who watched The Sound of Music will know this. There's a song, "How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you keep a wave upon the sand?" And that idea of we get used to a pattern or a thing that exists, but like a wave on the sand, that pattern will stay there for a few seconds. We enjoy it, and then a new wave will come, and sometimes it will actually take over the pattern that was there in a similar way, but maybe be a little bit longer or bigger or a slightly different shape. Sometimes it might go right up the beach and completely wash away any trace of the first pattern or patterns that were there. And I think that this is something that happens a lot in many ways around the world for different things, but it also happens with our memories um, of say, let's take languages for an example. I'll give you my example of Slovak. So I talked in the video about learning Slovak, and I said, learn Slovak in 2 weeks. The full context of what I said was that I studied it for 2 weeks for a presentation that I gave at the Polyglot Gathering as part of a competition. And that was the context. And that's what happened. So my story with Slovak is I had a background in Czech. I did an advanced diploma in Czech studies at Charles University. And that was in 2003, 2004. And so this is like 20 years ago now. And following that, I then also spent time in a Russian speaking environment and a Bosnian speaking environment, Serbian, Croatian as well, and also Macedonian as another Slavic language, and Bulgarian, and also Poland. And so I had this background in Slavic languages that was at that point, I think, fairly strong. And I'd had experience of the three main branches to a fairly good degree. And so, yeah, in a couple of weeks, I was able to watch actually comedy. I watched this comedy called Panelag, which is a Slovak comedy on Slovak TV online. And I could follow it fairly well because my background in Czech, particularly, but also Polish, some of the words that were not the same as in Czech were the same as in Polish, and vice versa. Some things were completely different to either language, but you kind of learnt those as the new thing. And so what I was learning in Slovak in an intensive way in that period was the differences and what was the same, and basically putting together Slovak to give a presentation in the language and to do it for a very specific event. I did that, and I was very happy that I came second. There were two categories. There was a category for Slavic language speakers and a category for non-Slavic language speakers. And I didn't think it was fair to take part in the non-Slavic language speaking category because a Slavic language is one of my home languages and has been for a long time. So it felt a bit wrong to do that. So I took part in the Slavic speaking category. And indeed, the person who beat me came in first place was a Polish German speaker who had been living in Czech Republic, so also had this Czech Polish background, but was obviously way better than I am at those other two languages because of a stronger background. Now, the interesting thing with doing that, and this is where the wave on the sand comes in, is that the waves on the sand that had kind of left a bit of a mark for me on my brain were Polish and Czech, well, particularly Czech, but Polish too. And then it was kind of, if you imagine two big waves on the sand that sort of leave like a mark, and then a third one comes over the top, and that would have just been sort of a smaller line that it made. It didn't go over the other two, but just went a little bit into them. And that was kind of what Slovak was in my brain. So when I went to do the presentation, to give it, I was able to do that. But obviously when it finished and when I went home and when I wasn't using Slovak, I can still understand it very well. I can still read it fairly well. But actually actively speaking it, no. And if I'm very, very honest about sort of this sort of thing, and this is one of the reasons why I never say I speak this many languages. I always say I've studied so many languages. I simply say that because I really do not know. I mean, the only one true thing that will always be true is that I've studied Slovak, and I did it intensively for 2 weeks to take part in a presentation. What I haven't done is study Slovak, kept it up, and continue to speak it. And that's the kind of difference that's important to note. So all of this knowledge, and even with other languages I've studied, absolutely for sure, they've been at different levels, they change. Unfortunately, this transient nature of knowledge, of perception, of ideas, of societal norms generally is in constant flux. And this is why we see an awful lot of people arguing about lots of different things online, offline, and they will agree and disagree on different points. But what both sides of any argument often miss is exactly this. Things change, things evolve, some things are completely erased in the memory, or feel very much like they've been completely erased or overwritten. Kind of like years ago, we used to have cassette tapes that you could record over, and you could basically, you wouldn't find the other information again. And if you think of even computer terms, where, you know, a hard disk, for example, there may be a way to be able to get some of the information back if you write it over it, but it may not be easy. And so this is a bit like how I think it is in the brain sometimes, where you feel that it's going to be possible to get this information very easily, but actually the reality is a bit different. And kind of this is where I think the waves on the sand, or the memory that you write over on your computer, and then you try to retrieve what you've deleted, or what you've what you've used afterwards, what's gone, because you've resaved a document or whatever. You know, like Word gives you this idea of here's the previous. Do you want to see a previous pre-saved version? Well, that might be a good analogy for this as well. So that kind of idea, I think, doesn't compute generally for a lot of people, simply because it doesn't fit our expectations of continually adding to our knowledge, continually moving forward, continually advancing, whether it's in our studies, our going from, you know, first level to second level to third level to fourth. We're always going up, 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 up. But never do we talk about, or very rarely do we talk about, you know, sort of treading water, or taking it down a level or a step, because we need to, for either other things get in the way, health, our commitments get in the way, or we just naturally have other interests that we want to explore, or we can't explore everything all of the time. And this is kind of the thing that I just get. Just give me 1 second. 1 second. Okay, do excuse me. I was I just heard a noise outside, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay. So anyway, so yeah, where was I? So yeah, when it comes to this idea of keeping ourselves moving forward constantly, actually the reality of life is different. And this is something that I talk often about with the people who come to my language learning therapy sessions. We talk about these sort of the real things that happen in life. And the thing is that it's not sexy, it's not Instagram fun, it's not something you can kind of polish and put on a YouTube video, or on a you know, on a post on Instagram or TikTok video or anything like that, or on Facebook. It's not fun, and it's not exciting, and it's not sexy, and it's just reality, and it's kind of bare bones. It's just what is, and it doesn't sell. You can't put a cool hashtag on it. You can't put a nice clickable image saying, yeah, follow Gray, follow normal, follow what life is really like. It just doesn't sell. You can't write a book to say it's and sell it in that way either. It's just, it is what it is. And it doesn't take away from how it actually is the reality of the world we live in. And societal norms being what societal norms are, they don't actually incorporate very often societal norms as they are lived as experiences by individuals within a society. They are often, societal norms are seen as what we expect we should see, the advances we should see. It's all the shoulds. It should be like this, it should be like that. But the actual reality of how people's lives play out is quite different. And it's only when we kind of hold a mirror up and we see how this looks in reality, when we talk to other people, when we see other people, we peek through the windows of somebody's house and see, okay, this is how their house is in reality. It's not this polished version of the sort of the Instagram sort of sexy scene or beautiful scene of a perfect thing. It's just, or whatever perfect even is, it's just not that. And it's not the BBC interview of me or of anyone else. That reality is a reality with a very different goal, a very different objective, a very different ideal of what it's supposed to be. And very often those things that we see or perceive and we think, oh no, I can't do that, or oh no, that's why am I failing, or why am I not doing it? It's because we also tend to make comparisons in our own lives for how we think we should perform, or how we think we should be, or how we think we should be doing something, compared to an image that isn't actually real, an image that is a snapshot taken in a certain light, edited in a certain way that makes it more appealing, more exciting, more entertaining, more interesting for a public. But the reality is actually that, it's just not so achievable or attainable, and it also doesn't take into account a lot of things. So snippets and sound bites and things, well, can sometimes be, and I'm not going to discount them, they can sometimes be quite motivational, because we think, oh, wouldn't that be cool if I could do that? Yeah, it might be cool to be able to make another video that sounds a bit like that. But the reality of what it actually means is quite different. I will never forget when I first made the very first YouTube video. I got lots of comments, some very positive about certain things, some very negative. But there are certain things I can't change. I can't change who I am. I can't change my appearance. I can't really do much about a lot of things that people comment on, which make it's absolutely not the point of what any of this is about anyway. But the other thing I can't necessarily do either in a couple of minutes, or even in a live for even hours, I can't necessarily impart everything that goes on in my head or what I know. That's also not possible in the same way. And I remember that, sort of, I've talked about the sort of, you can have this sort of image that doesn't look real. So you could, for example, you could memorize or learn how to speak with a certain accent in a certain way when it comes to languages, and present it as, this is me speaking this language, and actually the reality is it wouldn't sound as good as that to the ear of the people who think it's amazing if they were to hear it over a longer period of time. There are many things that go into what sounds good, what sounds bad, what sounds whatever. Likewise, the opposite can be true. So you can sometimes make a video, like my video on the very first one, when I spoke in Russian. The Russian sounded terrible. I freely admit that. The Polish on the BBC interview sounded terrible too, and that's fine. It can sound terrible sometimes. We're not always on our A game. We're not always able to perform in a perfect way. It's fine. But the actual reality, when I've met people, after I made those videos or did those interviews, was quite interesting, because I got comments of, I didn't actually think that you knew that language based on the video that I saw, and I didn't realize that you could actually communicate. And I got that for those two languages in particular. I've had it with other languages too, but for those in particular, I really did. I got those kinds of comments, those real, like, shocked, happy comments, which was very, very encouraging and very, very nice from my point of view. But it's always made me think that reality can often be very different. How we move forwards or backwards, or just slide along in our ability, our knowledge, our awareness, is just always constantly changing. And I think that the more that we can embrace this sort of evolution of ourselves, our ability, our awareness, our knowledge, and not see people as just one sort of picture of who they are today, but actually over the whole course of their lives, and not just also one aspect of an individual either. It's also the whole of the person. It's very difficult for us to do this, to conceptualize a person. Often, as soon as we slap labels on people, as soon as we do that, we're boxing people into certain things that we then find very difficult to take them out of. And people have this horrible tendency of changing, it's so someone who can think in one way or have certain beliefs or have certain abilities or have certain whatever, actually these people can change, and these people are on a journey. Like, we're all on a journey. You were not the same you as you are now 5, 10, even yesterday to a smaller degree, but every single year you change to a degree. You adapt, you grow, you learn. I would hope you learn, and you sort of you have different experiences. We maybe think that we're the same, and there was always going to be a core element of us that will be similar. Some things I always say, about my sense of humor, things that I find naturally funny, I possibly but my perception is also skewed. I also have these kinds of weird biases as well, like everyone else. Everyone has a bias, and we have our preconceived ideas and our perceptions of who we're talking to and who we are. And actually, we only have our own subjective opinion, thoughts about who we are and what we know. And it isn't until we sort of see things and talk to more people that we kind of get to see different sides of ourselves, of them, and maybe start to question what we know and what's true, what's not true, what's less true, what's more true, what's all of these things. And that applies to knowledge, it applies to ideas, it applies to opinions, it applies to labels, it applies to so many things. One one thing I always found really funny when I was a lot younger, I would meet people and they would say to me that one of the most common sort of opinions that, you had these kind of games, what do you think this person would be like or do or whatever? And the amount of people that just assumed that I would be good at chess, for example. And I never understood why or where that came from. And I'm not. I'm terrible at chess. But it was quite an interesting assumption that people made about me. And this is something that I think also we tend to do. We make assumptions. We base it on experience, lived experience that we think that we have or know, or it's linked to something in some way. And all of this kind of stuff I find fascinating in the human experience. When it comes to languages, though, what I want you to sort of take away from this is that you actually do not know what the perception of you and your knowledge is from somebody else's point of view necessarily. And sometimes we will be harder on ourselves than other people might be. I find that most often it's that way around. There have been people I've met where they definitely think that they have maybe more specialized expertise than they maybe would do to other people I could compare in a similar field. But generally speaking, we tend to have this skewed idea in a slight way. It's rarer to find somebody who actually, they say what they know and they feel it that way. I think often it's because of what we're used to at school, or what we're used to in sort of in exams. We kind of guess. And as I prepare for tomorrow to have an exam, in fact, this is how I see exams. For me, an exam is a snapshot of what I'm doing. I can't really change everything I know. I can study for it. I can prepare for it. But what it is a snapshot of what I know at that particular time. And if it's a reflection of that, and I see what that reflection is a few months later, the reflection may have changed by then anyway. But still, I find it quite fun or useful to do that, to get somebody else's view into what I've been able to do at that point. And there may be different things that impact it, how I'm feeling on the day, how I've been feeling the weeks before, if I've been sick, for example, or if I've not been able to, been very busy, not been able to study so much, or whatever it is. There will always be things that enter into that question. And these are the things that enter into your lives too. What's going on for you, what's happening to you, how you're feeling, what you're doing, what's going on. And I just, I see exams as exactly that, a snapshot, a picture. And so I don't get nervous when it comes to an exam, because it's kind of like you can't really do anything about it. I mean, it's just because it's a picture of what you know, and you're just trying to show off what you know. You can prepare the sort of exam style, but basically that's it. You're just trying to show what you know to see if you know it. And it's kind of a nice test to be able to check something off. But you can use that technique of kind of that exam technique in your studies anyway, when you're going through weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and months, so that when you can look back and actually say, okay, yeah, I do know that now. Actually, I did learn that. It's sometimes I find when people learn and meander through things and they don't feel that they've got anything concrete they can look back on, this is where we struggle. Try to describe where the lines of the waves were as they came on the sand. Try and remember that. It's very difficult. You might be able to get a few of them if the sort of the outline's still there, but would you get them perfect? I doubt it. And there's those sorts of imprints of the waves on your brain, on the sand, the waves on the sand, is fairly difficult to sort of retain. So just enjoy the picture of that snapshot with the waves that were on the sand as they were at that one time, and be aware and be happy, and that the next waves might eliminate those. They may add to them. They may change, or they will change. And so things will adapt. Things will move on. Things will evolve. And this is kind of the reality of life, the reality of learning, and particularly language learning. And I see it very, very often. And sometimes we just need a bit of a sort of mirror to look into to see where we are. Anyway, I've spoken enough, and I hope that my ramblings for today have been at least interesting to some of you. I appreciate that sometimes I get a little bit philosophical with these kinds of things, and I think it's important to keep our mental health as well. I am very concerned that I often hear from people who make comparisons to people who they don't really know, and they do see this sort of polished version. Even to me, sometimes they'll watch an interview that I've done, and that will be their perception of one thing. And it's one element of me and one element of my life at a particular time. And if it's on media or social media, it's an element that's edited for different purposes and different reasons. And remember, the internet loves controversy. So sometimes things will be done in a certain way to get people talking, to get people arguing, to get people agreeing and disagreeing. Because otherwise, you just end up with the grey that I like to talk about, because I think the grey is actually way more interesting. There's so much more depth in the grey. There's so much more to discuss. There's so much more meat in the sort of the discussion, the content of the grey. And I wish the grey were more exciting, and I wish the grey were more sexy to people. But I understand why it isn't. And I understand why it doesn't necessarily appeal, because it's not something you can stick on the wall. It's not something you can kind of have in your mind as a short, very nice soundbite or title or image or anything like that. But the grey is important, because the grey is most of our lives. The grey area is just, it's all consuming, and the extreme ends, the black and the white of the scale, are very, very rare. and as I say, they're things that we tend to gravitate towards, things we tend to hold up. But actually, the world is very much more this nuanced shades of grey. I think that's probably where I'm going to leave it. I'll have a look and see if I've got any comments to answer any questions. Nice to see you all, by the way. Thank you for joining. I appreciate I didn't say that I was going to come on today. I wasn't going to come on, if I'm honest, because I've got the exam tomorrow, but I felt inspired by preparing for the exam to come on and just to talk to you, because I think it is important. I've had people, even with these exams that I do for Cornish, people saying that they don't feel ready, they don't know enough. And it's interesting because when I hear them speak and when I hear them do things, I often think, well, actually, what you're doing now is fine. It's just our perception of what we want to do and have to know it perfectly and all that kind of stuff. It kind of stops us from doing things. Okay, here we go. You speak really clearly. Learning foreign languages help you to speak your own language better. It's a serious question. Oh, did learning foreign languages help me speak speak my English now more clearly? Potentially. Definitely it helped with grammar. It helped with vocabulary, because my main focus for language learning has been on 3 Indo-European groups mainly, which are Germanic and Romance in the first instance. They are languages that have had a lot of influence and impact on English and through history. And then Slavic is my third group that I've focused a lot on. But the other two really do help with English a lot. The Germanic languages, particularly with the grammar of English, understanding why we say certain things the way we say them, the way certain things work, and a lot of base vocabulary. And then the Romance languages definitely helped me with my more advanced vocabulary in English, understanding a lot more of English literature, a lot of certain things that you wouldn't technically necessarily know just from normal conversation. So yeah, absolutely it has. And do I speak more clearly as a result? I think I do tend towards more of a standardized English in my delivery. That's happened over my life. I didn't speak this way growing up, and don't always speak this way, but I do speak this way when presenting to an international audience or an audience that's not from where I'm from. And so, yeah, this is kind of the way I would normally speak. So this isn't me faking my way of speaking. It's just it's a way of speaking that's developed over years, and possibly, yeah, I don't think about it so much about it being language related. I always think of it more of a result of moving around, a result of being clear for people, so that I'd use a standardized form of English to communicate with people who have learnt it as a second language, or even a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever language they've learnt it as. And then also for other people from different parts of the English speaking world, where they may not know certain terms or certain things, to be clearer for them to understand too. Because I mean, language is, a tool for communication, to get across what's going on in my head to you, right? So there's an element of code switching that goes on, and so when you code switch enough, I guess it becomes more normalized. And I think, yeah, as a language learner, potentially that's just something that's ingrained in my brain, and I don't perceive it necessarily as that. But I from your question, and when I analyze it now in my head, I would potentially say that I wouldn't rule out that it's due to language learning as well. I certainly do consider the English that I use more after learning different languages. Sometimes it gets a bit fuzzy because I don't speak English all the time at home. But yeah. Let's see. Do you speak Polish? I can communicate in Polish, yes. Do I speak Polish? I would let you decide if we ever meet and you can speak to me in Polish. When I go to Poland, I don't use English. I only use Polish. It would be weird for me to use English in Poland. And I've never had anybody in Poland say to me, "Oh no, your Polish is like that bad that I can't understand you, and I'm not going to speak to you in Polish." It's never happened. And people don't reply to me in English. I think because when I speak, even if I make mistakes, which I do, because my Polish is definitely not amazing, people perceive me as a Slavic speaker because I speak a Slavic language at home all the time. So it sounds like a Slavic speaker, I guess, to a lot of Polish people's ears. That's at least what I've been told. So people do tend to speak to me in Polish. So yeah, I guess I can say I can speak Polish. And I can definitely communicate my ideas in Polish, and I can understand it pretty well. I can watch the news. I can get by fairly well. Do you speak Arabic? Not particularly well, no. I know a lot of stuff from Arabic. I've studied it on a number of occasions and not really got to a point ever where I've been able to communicate with any real confidence in the language. I hope to change that at one point during my life. Do you mind talking a little bit louder, please? Oh, I'm so sorry. I've only just seen. I don't know how much louder I can speak, but there may be something going on with the microphone. If it's not clear, I'm so sorry. I've only just seen that comment now. Why can't I find appropriate pace of speech? I'm not sure. There are different ways of speaking in any language. So I mean, you can, and depending on the occasion, we can speak at different paces. And I don't know if there's a right or a wrong for the pace, particularly of English. So some people will speak as I'm speaking now fairly slowly, and I'm quite happy doing that. I don't think it sounds too ridiculous. You can take it potentially where it goes very, very slow, but my original dialect is very fast, and so I recognize and have had experience of people finding it very difficult to understand and to follow conversation when you speak that way. So I guess I tend more towards the slow when it comes to communicating, particularly in this kind of context. How strong a wave was your experience with Estonian? That's a very good question. So the wave with Estonian for me, it was an interesting thing because it brought back memories of when I was in Finland and I studied Finnish at the university in Helsinki. My Finnish was never amazing. I mean, I studied up to the third level of Suomen Mestari, which is maybe kind of between A2 and B1 level Finnish, which is not bad. I mean, you can communicate. I did communicate in Finnish while I was there, but also it's not. I wasn't particularly fluent, if by any definition of the word fluent. And Estonian kind of it helped having done that before, and it kind of came and sort of embedded itself on my brain for that period of time. The big issue I found is because it's one of those languages that is not related to the languages I speak normally, and I don't get to speak, as you can imagine, in the Balkans, we don't have many Estonian speakers. So I don't get to use or hear Estonian unless I make a very big effort to do so. So when I hear music, or because there are a few songs that I like in Estonian now, when I hear things, I still remember things and I still understand certain things in Estonian, but probably my active recollection is quite minimal. I definitely wouldn't be able to organize the interview I set up when I did that interview on TV in Estonian, because I set all that up through Estonian and then I had the interview in Estonian. I would find that probably nigh on impossible to do now. But yeah, I mean, it's left a trace, I guess, but it's definitely not anywhere near where it was. It doesn't. If you study something quickly and intensively like that, and then you take a snapshot picture of it, and then people hold up that picture of what it looked like at that time. This is where I think the danger comes in. So I actually had this as well with Latvian. Latvian is a similar thing for me. I studied it. I could communicate when I was in Latvia. I spoke to a number of people. I probably did a course that was equivalent to B1. It's like sort of, or maybe even sort of between. I always felt I was kind of more like an A2 to B1, but the course was a B1 level course. But I now if I try and speak, it's terrible. But I was told by somebody that some people in Latvia still expected me to speak that way, and I just don't. And I was at an event. I think it may have been the Polyglot Gathering that I'm going to in about a week or so's time, and somebody who was a Latvian speaker came and said, "Oh, you speak speak Latvian." Spoke to me in Latvian, and it was quite a weird feeling because they spoke to me in Latvian. I was like, because I could understand what they were saying, but I couldn't really say much to them, and I felt very bad. But I could say bits. The really weird thing that happened, I remember I got the tram. It was in Bratislava, and I caught the tram. I think it was the tram that I got that was going back home, back to where I was staying, and all of this whole flood of Latvian vocabulary and sentences came into my head, and it was just so bizarre. When people talk about having an argument with somebody, and then all of the really good arguments that you wanted to say during the argument actually come into your head after you've left the person, and you don't think of them. You just come out with a load of nonsense, maybe, or you don't know. But the arguments that you actually had that were valid, they come into your head afterwards, and you think, "Oh, why didn't I say that? Or why didn't I do that?" It feels a bit like that with with the languages. Sometimes it's a bit like that, and that's kind of how it is a bit with Estonian, and with Latvian, but not just those, others as well. But yeah, that's a really good question. Opimmeko vielä suomea? So yeah, just Suomen Mestari 3 is where I got to, and then that was kind of it. I was in Finland for 2 months in Helsinki at the university. Mä opin Helsingin yliopistossa, mutta mä en puhu suomea hyvä nyt. Yeah, that's about as far as it's going to go at the moment. Unfortunately, it's not very good. It's not easy for me to. Yeah, it's definitely not easy for me to speak in Finnish now, especially after Estonian, and then like kind of forgetting Estonian too. It's all kind of merged, but yeah, when I read like basic, or when I hear basic things in Finnish, I can still. It doesn't sound completely foreign to me, if that makes sense. They are languages that I would love to have, but then you've got to keep them, and you've got to keep them up. The reality is, yeah, it sounds cool. You've got these languages. Wow, yeah, amazing. But then how are you using them to retain them? This is why when people say to me, which languages do you study and why do you study these languages? My focus has been on Germanic, Romance, and Slavic languages. Why? Because they're the languages I use. They're the languages I need for life, for social activities, for work, they're the language groups that I use most often. They're the language groups that I can most easily use within Europe, which is where I mostly am based. So yeah, me randomly learning other languages that are based in one part of Europe that's very far away from me, or in another part of the world, whilst they're extremely rewarding to do and to learn and to study and to learn about, the reality is actually keeping them up is very, very difficult, unless you can really truly integrate them, and then you might be able to keep them all to a certain level, but you've got to also do other things in life, right? You've got other things that have to go on. So unfortunately, привет, you can't really. It's I mean, Yeah, I hate to be that guy, but yeah. Your voice is not coming on. Please speak aloud. I don't know what's going on. Some of you are responding, some of you are not. So I'm not sure what's going on. Whether that's one person or two people with an issue, or whether it is an issue with my sound. I will do better next time. I'll see if I can look into it. Okay, let me see. I've got quite a lot of questions on YouTube as well, so I'm going to go over to YouTube in a second. Hi, Richard. Okay. I am what? Sorry, I am something of about my experience and language. I can't quite make out what you've written now, unfortunately. It's a bit small on my screen. It's a little bit difficult for me to see. Oh, the Caucasus. Oh, what my opinion of the language of the Caucasus is. So I have studied Georgian at university in Sweden, and I've studied Armenian at Yerevan University for virtual Armenian college, or an Armenian virtual college, which is an online thing to learn some Armenian. I've also studied some Azeri. Azeri obviously is related to Turkish. Turkish is a community language for me in the Balkans, and a language that I can communicate in, and it's similar enough that I can follow Azeri. I could read and understand what's going on if I read a text in Azeri, for example. But Armenian and Georgian are more challenging. I did 2 semesters at the University of Malmö in Georgian, and I came out of that feeling like I'd got a good overview of the Georgian language at the time. I just don't feel that way in the same way now. I feel I've still got a slight overview of the language, but not in the same way, and I don't feel like I could really do much with the language. So I know random words in Georgian still, and I can say certain things, but not very much. Armenian's a bit similar in that way. They're both languages that I never heard after I learnt them. After I started studying them, should I say? I never heard them ever. I'd never been to either country. I've still not been to Armenia or Azerbaijan. I've only been to Georgia, and then when I was there, I remembered certain words that I tried to use, but I couldn't really communicate, and I used Russian to communicate with people, particularly taxi drivers who spoke Russian. But otherwise, yeah, it was they're both very, very nice languages. I enjoyed learning them, but this is, again, it comes down to what can I actually use. And if I've got a particular reason to use them for a specific thing or project or something, then yes, I might go back to them. But as it is at the moment, they're just they feel very far away from where I am, and we don't have people from those countries necessarily here speaking those languages all the time. Although, yeah, maybe, who knows, that can change, right? Okay, I'm going to go back over to YouTube and go to the comments and just see if I can answer the questions here on YouTube. Okay. Thank you all for your patience. Okay. It was a long time ago when I learned English alone, but I've read that, but I can't understand just a little. Can you give me advice, please? How can I learn languages, please? Oh, now that's a very open question, a very wide question, and definitely something that I've done a number of lives on learning languages. But if you're finding it difficult to understand, for example, when people speak, I guess I imagine that what would probably be a good idea is to listen along with the written word, so that you get used to hearing it and using the same materials over and over again. So let me give you an example. You could watch a show watch an episode of a show or listen to a podcast and read along with the show with subtitles, or with a podcast with the text that goes with it, and then leave it for a day, and then just listen to it, and then go back and read it again. Or you could just read it, and then if it's a podcast transcript, and then you could go back and listen again with the text. It's often a good way to do it. So one thing that I heard from somebody learning Irish that I thought was a really cool thing to do, and not everyone's going to want to do this, this is just one idea that you could try, would be they were learning Irish and they went on to RTE, which is the Irish app for the Irish TV, and they would watch Rus Naroon, which is very long-running Irish language series on TV in Ireland, and they would watch it with the subtitles in English first, and then they'd watch it with the subtitles in Irish, and then they'd watch it with no subtitles. And so they do that 3 times. They'd watch the same thing 3 times, and the thing that does is it gets you exposed to the same language a few times, because we need to repeat things. It's all about repetition when it comes to language learning. And they said that they found within about 6 months or a year, they found it a lot easier to follow spoken Irish. And I thought that was good advice that I definitely should follow at some point. Yeah, hopefully I will get to follow that at some point myself. I don't have so much time for shows, unfortunately, so it's a little bit difficult. Timothy, hello. Larry, hello. Hello, Mr. M4R. What's it? I can't reach your name. Hola, tudo bem? Hi, David. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Okay, thank you for the question, by the way. So, Timothy, if an exam is a snapshot, I wish you a nice picky for your album tomorrow. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. Okay, hi Richard, I am so interested in this discussion, societal norms and languages. I have found French people in particular to be very strict, formal, conscientious, rigid in terms of etiquette and mindset. Yeah. While Hispanics and Americans in general are so down to earth, spontaneous, relaxed, friendly, informal, more humane and creative orientated. Okay, original, etc. Yeah, there are going to be societal norms that differ as well from one country to another. What I find really interesting is how we measure success and what success looks like. I have very, I guess, divergent views from the norm about what success looks like, because I think success is how you feel. I don't think success is what people should put on you. I think it's how you feel, and success can look differently to different people. And if you're happy with what you've achieved and what you've done, then you're successful. I don't think that it's to do with kind of either necessarily monetary gain or even, winning prizes, or it's actually, for me, what counts in life from people that I come across is making a small difference in the day-to-day lives of other human beings, just making their lives a little bit brighter, a little bit happier, helping them. And so there are certain people that are in my kind of experience of life on a day-to-day basis that really are successful in doing that. And I don't think that society, with their norms and what they think is successful, would necessarily recognize them in the same way. But that doesn't mean that they are not successful. They definitely are. So yeah, when it comes to this, I find it I find it very interesting as well. So thank you. In philosophy, I find that exams tend to be a poor representation of knowledge of the person. It is truly a snapshot, but as soon as you create a discussion about it, you make it more profitable. Yep, and I agree that the snapshot is basically a snapshot against a background that is already prescribed by the person setting the exam. And so it can be a very strange snapshot. So depending on how prepared you are for a certain topic, or if the topic is something you're naturally interested in or feel, motivated to write about or talk about, that will also impact the snapshot as well, right? The background, the lighting, all the stuff that goes into a snapshot, because then you start talking about it, and everyone brings their own perspective and knowledge, and then you can essentially create a tree of knowledge about it and learn more. I love that. That's very nice, Nimrod. I really like that. Yeah, I agree that when you start talking to other people, you start to see different elements and things that you hadn't imagined before. Absolutely. Thank you for your time. Best of luck on your exam. Thank you, Reggie. Richard, do you think people develop accents because they read too much early on without actually listening to the language enough? It's better to just listen to the language if you want a good accent. Is it better to just listen to the language if you want a good accent? So reading can affect your accent. Possibly. I'm not sure. I don't feel like I've got an answer that I feel happy with to give. It's complete. I can think of examples I've seen where people have read words but they didn't know how to pronounce it, particularly in English. It's a very big problem for English speakers. And then they pronounce it differently, and then people will laugh about it. And people make videos about this kind of thing all the time. And then a different way of pronouncing it will take hold, and there'll be alternatives or whatever if it becomes normalized. But if you mean for like foreign languages, potentially, particularly if you're learning languages that are related to other languages you speak well, it can have an impact, I guess. But yeah, listening, if you want to improve your accent, then you or improve your accent. It sounds. I'm not a big fan of the whole improve your accent thing, but if you want to have an accent that sounds more like a particular speaker of a language, that's I feel happier with. Then listening and imitating and getting feedback is the best way for sure. And learning how that accent sits in the mouth and in the throat, and how you would then be able to use it. Have you seen any new AI-powered language learning tools? Thoughts? Well, yeah. I've obviously ChatGPT I've used myself in terms of as a language learning tool, and it's a lot of fun. But Memrise have just brought out their chatbot thing, the Membot, and I played with that before it came out. I went to the Memrise offices, and that was pretty cool. Speaking into a microphone and interacting with the Membot. I think there's a couple of videos out there somewhere from Memrise that they recorded me doing this. And it was a lot of fun. I think there's going to be a long way for this to go. It's going to keep developing, and yeah, it's quite exciting to see what's happening. It can feel scary for a lot of us, I think, sometimes with new things and things changing. This is the thing that I think as human beings, I think that we do have a problem with change. We sometimes think we don't. Sometimes we appreciate that we do. But I think change is tough. It's tougher than we imagine, and it runs a lot deeper than we imagine as well. Because change at its core is a signal of our mortality and the transient nature of life. And so I think that a lot of that is kind of plays into it. It's one of the things that you see, when people try to hold on to customs and ideas and ideals of yonder year, when I was younger, it was all better and it was all this and it was all that. And you have it easy now, your new generations and all that kind of thing. I don't buy into that. I actually think that we just have very different lives, and that life has just evolved and changed. And in some ways, I think that the Generation Z, as it's called in the US, and Generation Alpha, I think in a way actually have a a lot more stresses than I had growing up as a Generation X. These are all this idea, this terminology is something it wasn't in our cultural consciousness when I was growing up. But I recognize it as a very useful tool to have, to be able to label these things and to make these distinctions. But yeah, I think that things change, and so the AI tools that we see, some will be good, some will be bad, some will be somewhere in the middle, and I think they'll continue to change. And I think that, as we've done in many iterations in life on this planet, we will continue to update our toolbox for what we can use. And I think that this is potentially quite an exciting thing for many reasons. I think it sounded more muffled on Instagram than on YouTube. YouTube sounds better. Oh, right, okay. Next life. I don't know what's going on then on Instagram. Maybe it's because of the way my camera is, my phone is. So I use my phone for Instagram, and I use the computer for YouTube. So maybe it's because of the way the microphone's positioned. I'm not sure. I'll try and improve it for next time. I'm sorry if on Instagram if you've had a difficulty with this time. L'esprit d'escalier. The Estonian for l'esprit d'escalier is to be wise in hindsight. Absolutely. Absolutely. Hi, Richard. Have you tried Whisper AI to convert speech to text? It's great, at least for European languages, Japanese and Indonesian. Hugely helpful to unlock comprehensibility of audio content. I haven't used it yet. No, I have heard of it. I've Whisper AI, but I've not used it. But thank you for bringing it up. I'll have to look into it probably after my exam now. But I will do that after my exam. I should really also start preparing my presentation properly for Poland, but hopefully I'll get to that as well. Let me see. Wow, there are lots of questions still. I'll do my best to get through the questions on YouTube. I probably won't get back to Instagram to answer questions. Hi, Richard, have you tried to... Okay, that was... Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Which language do you speak the strongest after English? That's a question I was asked actually recently in Switzerland. And it's very difficult to answer. I don't know is the short answer, although I don't know. There are a number of languages I use at home as kind of home languages. So, I mean, typically, yeah, we've used 5 languages at home: English, French, Macedonian, Spanish, and German. And they're one languages that I've used a lot for a lot of different reasons. It would be Macedonian French, I guess, but I'm really not sure. I'm really not sure. I've been speaking Macedonian now for like 20 years, and it's a sort of a home language. It's a long time, and this is a thing I think that perception. I would have always said French, but I honestly don't know. Possibly French, still, but I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. Do you consider Russian a lingua franca? It is in some parts of lingua franca, absolutely. Sometimes it is a lingua franca. I've used it as a lingua franca before. Okay, verbal words. Thank you very much. Tenerife, Spain, Africa. Okay, hey peeps, hello. Pachi, hey, how's it going? What about learning Western Frisian? Who fancies joining me? Pachi, that's cool. I did a Frisian course once at the there was a, what do they call it? A MOOB, MOOB, on, is it a MOOB? Yeah, that feels wrong, but feels like I'm saying something else, but I'm not going to go down that road. But yeah, at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, they had one of these courses for like took 3 weeks, I think, to get into Frisian. It was quite an interesting course.
and it was on one of those, or FutureLearn, I think it was on FutureLearn on that website. It was a free course, so if you're interested in getting into it, and I don't know whether it was Western Frisian, I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, that was quite cool. Richard, if I could ask a practical question, I've tried everything, but I can't roll my R's for Dutch. Do you have any magical advice? Don't. So I learned Dutch in Rotterdam, and Rotterdam, you don't roll your R's, you speak like this. So it's Rotterdam. So you don't need to roll your R's in Dutch. It's not necessary. If you can't do it, don't do it. Some people will be able to learn to roll their R's. They can go, and they sort of like this sort of speech therapy type thing. I mean, describing how you do it is one thing, but in Dutch you definitely do not need to be able to roll your R's to speak Dutch. It's quite common to I don't roll my R's in Dutch. I do in other languages, but not in Dutch. I don't think so anyway. Usually I don't. Yeah, Rotterdam. Ik spreek. Yeah, no, I don't. No, ik spreek Nederlands. Don't say ik spreek. No, ik spreek Nederlands hoor. Ja, maar gewoon zo. Ja, geen. Ja, nee, dat doe ik niet. No, I don't know. I definitely do have the Rotterdamse air. Rot. But yeah, you don't need to. Depends what type of Dutch you're learning. Obviously, I think in certain areas of the Netherlands, it's more common. Okay. Let me see. I've heard Steve Kaufman talk about using Whisper. Oh, really? Okay. I'll have to have a look at it now and see. You've got me interested in this Whisper AI. Oh, you did some Frisian. Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was cool, Patchy. It was cool. The Frisian was quite interesting to get into. One of the reasons why I wanted to look at Frisian at that point was it's always when you learn about sort of English, you're always told that the closest language to English is Frisian. It's not. In terms of like languages, I mean, look, the term languages is problematic for me anyway. I think it's language dialect. It's weaponized way too much. But if I were to talk about languages that are closest to English, I would have to say Scots is the closest language to English. It's definitely not Frisian. Frisian's it's a related language, but it's not the closest. I think Scots is, and that's probably where some linguists are probably having kittens right now, saying debating whether or not it's a language. Well, a language is 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 a language. It's all very sort of subjective for many people, and many people have their own views on this thing. This is one of the things I want to talk about in Poland. I find it absolutely bizarre and fascinating, and all the things in between. When I talk about this, I get a bit philosophical when I talk about this as well. JR, thank you for the kind compliment about my Dutch. Is it similar to Old English? What, Frisian? Only in that the languages have common ancestors. I mean, they're from the same language family, so yeah, in that way, yeah. But I don't know if I'd say common in that, sort of, definitely. Okay. We'd still love to be able to roll your R though. Oh, Israeli, I know you mean. I mean, I'm happy to kind of talk more about this at some point. I see the rolling of the R and things like that as part of a linguistic snobbery. So I'm not a huge fan of linguistic snobbery. When people say you have to do this or you have to do that, particularly with the rolling of the R, because some people can't. Some people just never, and they speak a language, maybe even monolingually, they speak a language where they have commonly trilled R. Italian, for example, I've lost count of the amount of Italians I've met who can't roll their R's. And in Italian, typically you do in standardized Italian. But the same in Balkan languages, and the same in you hear people on TV and in Serbian, in Macedonian, in Bulgarian, or whatever. You hear very, very typically that they can't roll their R's. It's a very common phenomenon. It's not. Look, it's not a deal breaker for me. Yeah. The pencil in the mouth of the R. I know that just for the oo and u sounds, but not for the R. The R I always thought was a kind of you have to get used to passing air through your mouth, let your tongue relax. And you're basically, your tongue is allowed to move kind of like a piece of paper in the wind, like this. And it flutters from back, top to bottom, like this. And then you can practice the different sounds of the R, or the different sounds of your tongue trilling, if you move your tongue backwards and forwards in your mouth. So you can go and hear the different frequencies it can make. This is a type of thing that I used to like doing when I was a child as well. Still enjoy it. Anyway, I suppose I should get going because it's already been quite late and I need to study for my exam tomorrow. So I will look forward to seeing you all soon. Hopefully next week I will be around, and we'll talk some more. Feel free to drop any comments in the comment section. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this stuff, and let's see if we can talk a bit more about the grey stuff that I think is important and actually takes up most of our lives, and instead of the shiny sort of ends of the spectrum, which doesn't take up as much, I guess, when it comes to interest language learning study. Take care, have a wonderful week, and I will speak to you all soon. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye. Happy language learning.